So far, we've been thinking about how we get that first aspect of an enforceable contract in place, a simple apparent contract, and we said we needed agreement, intent, and consideration. We were looking in the last couple of videos around the issue of offer, right? How we begin this process of agreement. As well as an offer, though, we need to have an acceptance, and this is something that we've got going on in the espresso machine drama. Let's have a look. So you'll remember that as part of the module on offer, we said that something like an Instagram post would actually not be an offer, but an invitation to treat. And therefore, this purported acceptance, something that looks like an acceptance, actually becomes the offer. And now we can see that we've got this live offer. We get the supplier saying, deal, just confirmed by email. So that's a big question. When you say something like deal, just confirm, do you actually have an acceptance or not? Does that show a meeting of minds? And then when the email is sent off to confirm, it bounces and doesn't actually reach the supplier. So all through this problem, we can see, is there truly an acceptance here? Because we've got doubts as to what's going on. In this video, we're going to look at some of the rules around acceptance that help us determine whether we actually do have agreement. So just as an offer involves someone indicating by words or actions that they're willing to immediately enter into a legally enforceable contract, the same is an acceptance where the offeree must accept that offer by words or by actions and indicate that they're willing to immediately enter into an enforceable contract on the terms offered. So an acceptance must show that they've got this willingness immediately on the terms offered. Once an offeree accepts the offer, we do have agreement, and if the other elements are in place, we have a simple apparent contract. The offeree can't change their mind after accepting, unless, of course, the offeror agrees to release them. This inability of the offeree to change their mind mirrors the inability of the offeror to revoke the offer once it's been accepted. And it's because of this that we say the contract is formed at this point in time when the offer gets accepted. So in terms of this particular module, we're going to deal with 3 requirements of a valid acceptance. An acceptance must be unqualified, it must be communicated, and it must be made in reliance on the offer. Or in other words, made with knowledge of and in response to the offer. If an acceptance doesn't have those 3 aspects to it, then an independent observer would say that we don't have evidence of agreement there. So that's why we need those 3. An unqualified acceptance, communicated, made in reliance of the offer. So the first requirement is that an acceptance must be unqualified. So what does that actually mean? Well, if you qualify your acceptance, it means you put a condition on it. So you don't really accept it. Just say I wanted to buy your computer and you said, yes, I'll sell you my computer provided you give me your mobile phone as well. Yes, I'll sell you my computer provided you do this other thing, which is a fairly big thing, right? So we don't actually have agreement. You've qualified the acceptance of my offer to buy your computer. And what that actually does is it creates a counteroffer. And we know from Hyde and Wrench that when we have a counteroffer, it means the original offer is off the table. And this purported acceptance, purported just means supposed to be what looks like, right? So this purported acceptance of, yes, I accept your offer to buy my computer if you throw in your mobile phone, that purported acceptance actually becomes the new offer. You're offering to sell me your computer provided I pay the amount of money plus my mobile phone. And somewhat trickily, it means that the person who says that can't go back to the earlier offer. So let's think about this in a little more detail. Imagine you offer to sell me your car for $15,000 and I say, I accept, provided you wash it weekly for a year. Now, we know that this purported acceptance is actually qualified, and so it amounts to a counteroffer. So if you said no, or even if you didn't say anything, right? You don't even need to say no. But if I then decide, well, actually, look, I really want the car, and I came back in and said, okay, don't worry about washing, I'll pay the $15K, we still don't have a contract. Why? Well, this was an offer. This was a qualified acceptance, which amounts to a counteroffer, and the counteroffer kills this offer. So that means this second reply from me is actually a new offer without the washing requirement. It's back to the original offer, but I'm making it to you. That's why understanding these kinds of interactions can be exceptionally important. Okay, now we've gone through why the acceptance must be unqualified, because without that, there's no meeting of minds on the terms and conditions. You actually don't have agreement if someone's throwing in new terms, new conditions to the deal. Just say we've got an unqualified acceptance. Have we got enough? Well, it depends. That acceptance needs to be communicated. If the offeror doesn't know that the offeree has accepted, there's no meeting of minds. That kind of makes sense, right? If I make an offer to you and you accept it, but I don't know, then our minds haven't met yet. You have to be able to tell me. And by tell, I mean indicate in some way, not necessarily literally verbally tell you. You must communicate the acceptance. That can be in writing, that can be verbally, or that can be by conduct. Let's look at some of the trickier areas around this communication. So as we've said, acceptance must be communicated in order to ensure the meeting of minds. The offeror can't insist that failure to respond is acceptance. So what does that mean? I will sell you my computer for $500, and if I don't hear back by tomorrow, I'll consider it sold. So this is an example of where the offeror is trying to insist that a failure to respond is acceptance. That is not allowed. Okay, you can't make the offeree do something to reject your offer. Offeree must do something to accept if it's going to be valid. Okay, so that's what we mean by the offeror can't insist on silence. Because if that was true, then someone could just send you an email saying, I'm going to sell you my computer for $10,000. If I don't hear back from you by tomorrow, I'll consider it sold. And if you don't respond, if you're away or something and there's a contract, like that doesn't make any sense at all, right? You can't make the other person have to do something to reject your offer. So the offeror cannot insist on silence. Now, while the offeror can't insist upon silence, it doesn't mean that acceptance needs to be explicit. Oh my goodness, what are you talking about? Okay, let's take the situation of selling the computer. If I said to you, I'll sell you my computer for $500, and you said back to me, if you don't hear from me by tomorrow, consider it sold. If the offeree said that, if you said that back to me, and I don't hear back from you, we've got a contract. Why? Well, you have taken action. You have said, I will accept it unless I tell you otherwise, right? That's what's really going on when you insist on silence. It's very different than when I, as the offeror, try and impose that on you. So silence can be acceptance if it comes from the offeree, because it is not about the offeree's inaction. The offeree actually has done something. Again, you don't need to write out or verbally talk about acceptance if you do something. Several times through the module, we've been talking about a reward where you offer a reward for a pet. You don't have to accept that and then go find the pet, right? Your performance, bringing the pet back, can be acceptance. So really conduct, unilateral performance is good acceptance. And finally, in many business situations, you'll deal regularly with people. So you might be a supplier or have a supplier who you regularly order from. So someone would order something and that would be considered an offer. Maybe there's no communication back that you accept the order, you just kind of deliver it. So in those kind of circumstances where there's previous conduct that indicates it would be accepted. Okay, so some exceptions to that issue that you must really physically communicate it in. The real takeaway is the offeror can't insist on it, and the offeree must do something, either carry out the action, they can say they're going to be silent, or they must have acted with a pattern of behaviour in the past, right? When it's the offeree doing that, okay, we can have acceptance. Now, something that we must be aware of is that if the offeror specifies a mode of acceptance, so for instance, if the offeror says acceptance must be by email, then the acceptance must be by email. I can't call you up and accept by phone. That won't be a valid acceptance. Because, for instance, there's no physical record like there is an email. So, acceptance must be communicated in the form specified or in a manner that's just as prompt and as advantageous to the offeror. It's always best to accept in the way that the offeror has specified, if they do. And if that method isn't specified by the offeror, then it's whatever is reasonable, whatever most people in that industry do. Now, for those who've done a lot of legal studies, you'll note we're not covering the postal acceptance rule, which can include silence. Why? Not a lot of people actually use the post these days in terms of contract. We are far more likely to use electronic communication, and there's now legislative provisions such as Section 24 here of the Electronic Transactions Act that specify when it's communicated, when it's retrievable from the recipient's address, okay? So that's one of the reasons we don't cover the postal acceptance rule here. The rules you need to know is it's got to be communicated. That issue of the offer, not insisting that a failure to respond is acceptance, and a couple other things that might look like that but aren't. And finally, that if the offeror specifies a mode of acceptance, you need to use that way of accepting, that mode of acceptance. Now, the final rule that we deal with is that acceptance must be made in reliance of the offer. Look, this is a really unusual one. It's probably never going to come up. But basically, you can't have a meeting of minds. You can't accept something unless you know about the offer. And the classic case for this is the Crown against Clark, where you had a nefarious character who the police had hauled in because there was a murder investigation and they thought that this individual might have done it. Now, as they interviewed this person, because they were a suspect, that person, the suspect, actually gave them some information that led to the arrest of the real murderer. Now, this original suspect later finds out that there was a reward offered for anyone who gave information that led to the arrest of the real murderer. And so later on, they decided, well, I gave the information, I'm going to claim the reward. But the court held they couldn't get that reward. Why not? Well, a reward is a contract. We'll give you this money if you give us information leading to the arrest. And there was no meeting of minds. There was no agreement. When the suspect gave the information to the police, they were doing so that they wouldn't be charged with murder. They didn't even know about the offer. So therefore, there was no meeting of minds. There was no agreement because their acceptance, providing the information, being the acceptance in a reward case, their acceptance was unrelated to the offer. They didn't even know about it, no meeting of minds. So acceptance must be made in reliance of the offer. And there you have it. Whenever you see an acceptance, you've got to ask yourself, is it unqualified? Was it communicated to the offeror? Did they know about the offer when they made it? If it meets those three conditions, bingo, we've got a valid acceptance, and now we can say we have agreement. Whew. So that's the first major hurdle in establishing a simple apparent contract. We actually need to have agreement, offer and acceptance, a valid offer and a valid acceptance. Now that we've got that, we can move on to the next element. Did these parties intend to create legally binding obligations? Intent.